Medusa Steel Coaster is one of RMC's international creations, is a redo of a CCI wind roller coaster down at Six Flags in Mexico, also called Medusa, and it is revamped into Medusa Steel Coaster. It was actually one of RMC's earlier creations. It opened in 2014, and this is one of those rare situations where the revamp has some stats that are less than the original stats. Like for instance, the original Medusa was 105 feet tall. Medusa Steel Coaster is only 98 feet tall. Max speed 58 miles per hour, that's a 3 miles per hour increase from the original Medusa, and it's got about 136 feet less of track length. But it shouldn't even be comparable which ride is better. All of these iBox rebuilds are miles ahead of their original creations. This one has 3 inversions, multiple airtime moments, and overall is a fairly funky layout when compared to other RMC hybrids. So many of these RMCs are just ejector hill, ejector hill, ejector hill, inversion, ejector hill. This one has a lot of swooping turns. You'll definitely find some airtime moments, but I think it really goes back to the original Medusa, which is a pretty strange layout. It really utilized the terrain of the area, but if anything, this new iBox creation does that even more so. Some sections that were higher off the ground are now a lot lower, really hugging the ground. That's pretty cool. But I think layout-wise, by nature, it lends itself to being a weaker layout when compared to some of the other hybrids. So of course, while I still very much enjoyed the attraction, I wouldn't say it was one of RMC's best. I know this was the first hybrid to utilize that barrel roll down drop that you can now find on Storm Chaser and Twisted Timbers. And when you compare this to those two rides, I think both of those are just miles ahead of this attraction. But that doesn't mean that Medusa is bad. So let's walk through some of these moments. When you crest off the lift, the first thing you do is bank to the left, much like Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. And if you've done that ride or Twisted Timbers, then you can imagine what this barrel roll down drop feels like. Very cool sensation in the back. It really pulls you through it. That's of course where you hit your max speed. And this is a very low to the ground, fast-paced bend, sends you up into the next hill, which even though it's a bank turn, you do get airtime going into it. You swoop to the right and twist out into another slight little ejector pop into another one of these bank curves, and you'll find several of these throughout the ride. It's again one of those reasons why I say Medusa kind of has a funky layout. You rise back up into another bank curve, twist out. If you're in the back, you're going to get some pretty good ejector airtime here. And then one of my favorite airtime moments on the ride, when you're in the front about to enter this curve, you get ejected out of your seat before banking to the left, and I think that's really how Medusa utilizes airtime during this ride. Inherently, through all of the elements that I've talked about so far, there hasn't been any true airtime hills per se. Everything is a bank turn, but what RMC has done is very similar to what GCI does, where right before or after you're entering or exiting a bank turn, it twists out slightly so you get ejected a little bit. But this part right here is pretty fun, kind of flying through some of the under part of the structure, and actually there's an even better moment doing that exact same thing later on in the ride. Following that, you enter inversion number 2. This is another one of RMC's signature 0G rolls. You bank to the right up against the ground. You get thrown into an off-axis airtime hill. This is one of the only true airtime hills during the ride. And this is pretty awesome where you're flying right in between 2 trees. It's really the only part of the ride where it's kind of not up against the rest of the structure. It's kind of going off to do its own thing before you're banking to the right into a curve. And now you have probably the biggest airtime hill during the ride. And this isn't an off-axis hill or anything. This is just a good old-fashioned airtime moment. Some really good ejector airtime here. You enter the third and final one of those curves low to the ground, another bank turn, and then our last inversion. And this is by far the one moment on Medusa that stood out the most because of how different it was compared to every other RMC. And that's because this inversion gives hang time. This is a slow moving roll, and it's kind of hypnotic to watch. It's just so perfectly profiled that you're just constantly rotating as you move through this thing. It's very strange. You know, most of the time when RMC has an inversion, including the other moments on Medusa, you kind of whip in and out of them. This is not one of those. You gracefully enter and exit this roll. So is it the best part of the ride? I think it is definitely the most surprising moment. But whether it is your favorite part depends on what kind of elements you're looking for. Like if you're an airtime guy, this probably won't be your favorite part. But if you love hang time, this is going to wow you. And then we're in our last section of the ride, which is some very Steel Vengeance-esque flying through the structure of Medusa, before you pop up into the brake run. By no means does Medusa feel like a short ride. I'd say it's a very appropriate length of track, pretty average to an RMC. So it's a good roller coaster. Part of me does wish it was paced a little bit faster. I got a decent number of rides on this thing, and as you can imagine, the ones that were later in the day was when the train was running a bit faster. Some of those morning rides were pretty slow and a little underwhelming, to be honest. And I don't know if it's just because RMC has done a lot better attractions since this came out. Maybe we're just spoiled with all of the amazing RMC creations. But after doing Medusa, I think it definitely sits on the lower end in terms of my favorite RMCs. And I don't think that's really anything against what RMC did. I think it really just comes down to the original layout of Medusa, what they had to work with. But I'll tell you one thing that Medusa was great at, and that was a night ride. Flying through the structure and back towards in some of those trees, that was pretty great. I got 3 different night rides on Medusa, and all of them were my favorite that I got. One other thing that I'll mention before I give this ride a final score, this queue is so fun. The park actually reused an old walkthrough like the one at Six Flags Over Texas and converted it into part of the queue. So it's basically a fun house. You're walking through a couple rooms where the floor is tilted. You're seeing lots of different props. Looks like this old kind of cabin in the middle of a woods. Very creepy, dusted over. I'm not entirely sure exactly what that has to do with Medusa, but I wasn't complaining. I liked it. You almost never see a queue for a big roller coaster like that, so automatically this is like one of the best queues ever. That was a big surprise for me. I didn't know that going in, but definitely something to look forward to. But for Medusa's final score, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. That's because it does a lot of things well, but I think when you compare this to a lot of the other mid-sized RMCs, you know, the ones that kind of hover around that 100-foot mark, I would take most of them over Medusa. Now, I was told that when we rode it was running a little bit slower than normal, but again, I thought some of those night rides it was running fairly fast. But even aside from speed, I wouldn't say the layout really wowed me. But if you've never done a ride of this style, like I imagine a lot of the people in Mexico City haven't done many of these RMCs, I imagine they've probably never seen anything like this. So it could be that I'm just a little bit more critical because I've done so many RMCs. I know what they're capable of, but I have no doubt that the ride is a heck of a lot better than it used to, and it still remains one of, if not the star attraction at Six Flags Mexico. So I'd love to hear from you guys. If you've ridden Medusa Steel Coaster, what do you think of it? Post all your thoughts down in the comments below. And of course, stay tuned for more coaster reviews here at Coaster Studios, and we'll see you next time.